Hence there arises a suspicion that the legend was originally framed in the form presented to us by the Halliwell poem and copied apparently by the writers of the Harleian and Roberts manuscripts, and that the insertion of the name of Prince Edwin was an afterthought of the copiers of the more recent manuscripts, and that this insertion of Edwin's name and the error of making him a son of Ethelstan arose from a confusion of the mythical Edwin with a different personage, the earlier Edwin, who was king of Northumbria. It may also be added that the son of Ethelstan is not called Edwin in all of the recent manuscripts. In one Sloane manuscript, he is called Ladrain, in another Hegme, and in the Lodge of Hope manuscript, Hoderine. This fact might indicate that there was some confusion and disagreement in putting the name of Prince Edwin into the legend. But I will not press this point, because I am rather inclined to attribute these discrepancies to the proverbial carelessness of the transcribers of these manuscripts. How, then, are we to account for this introduction of an apparently mythical personage into the narrative, by which plausibility of the legend is seriously affected? Anderson, and after him Preston, attempts to get out of the difficulty by calling Edwin the brother and not the son of Ethelstan. It is true that Ethelstan did have a younger brother named Edwin, whom some historians have charged him with putting to death. And insofar the legend might not be considered as incompatible with history. But as all the manuscripts which have to this day been recovered, which speak of Edwin, call him the king's son and not his brother, notwithstanding the contrary statement of Anderson. Footnote. Anderson says in the second edition of the Book of Constitutions that in all the old constitutions it is written Prince Edwin, the king's brother, a statement that is at once refuted by a reference to all the manuscripts from the Dowland to the Papworth, where the word is always son. So much for the authority of the old writers on Masonic history. I prefer another explanation, although it involves the charge of anachronism. The annals of English history record a royal Edwin, whose devotion to the arts and sciences, whose wise statesmanship, and whose patronage of architecture must have entitled him to the respect and to the affection of the early English Masons. Edwin, King of Northumbria, one of the 7 kingdoms into which England was divided during the Anglo-Saxon Heptarchy, died in 633, after a reign of 16 years, which was distinguished for the reforms which he accomplished, for the wise laws which he enacted and enforced, for the introduction of Christianity into his kingdom, and for the improvement which he effected in the moral, social, and intellectual condition of his subjects. When he ascended the throne, the northern metropolis of the Anglican Church had been placed at York, where it still remains. The king patronized Paulinus, the bishop, and presented him with a residence and with other possessions in that city. Much of this has already been said, but it will bear repetition. To this Edwin, and not to the brother of Ethelstan, Modern Masonic archaeologists have supposed that the legend of the craft refers. Yet this opinion is not altogether a new one. More than a century and a half ago it seems to have prevailed as a tradition among the Masons of the northern part of England. For in 1726, in an address delivered before the Grand Lodge of York by its junior Grand Warden, Francis Drake, he speaks of it as being well known and recognized in the following words: "You know we can boast that the first Grand Lodge ever held in England was held in this city, York, where Edwin, the first Christian king of the Northumbrians, about the 600th year after Christ, and who laid the foundation of our cathedral, sat as Grand Master." Footnote. Bede, L2, C13, and Rapin, page 246, both confirm this statement that the foundations of the York Cathedral or minster were laid in the reign of Edwin. Brother A.F.A. Woodford, a profound Masonic archaeologist, accepts this explanation and finds a confirmation in the facts that the town of Derventio, now Aldby, 6 miles from York, the supposed seat of the pseudo-Edwin, was also the chief seat and residence of Edwin, King of Northumbria, and that the buildings said in one of the manuscripts to have been erected by the false Edwin were really erected, as is known from history, by the Northumbrian Edwin. I think that with these proofs, the inquirer will have little or no hesitation in accepting this version of the legend and will recognize the fact that the writers of the later manuscripts fell into an error in substituting Edwin, the son, as they called him, but really the brother, of Athelstan for Edwin, the king of Northumbria. It is true that the difference of dates presents a difficulty, there being about 300 years between the reigns of Edwin of Northumbria and Athelstan of England. But that difficulty, I think, may be overcome by the following theory which I advance on the subject. The earlier series of manuscripts, of which the Halliwell poem is an exemplar, and, perhaps, also the Harleian and the Roberts manuscripts, footnote. The fact that the legend in the Roberts constitutions agrees in this respect with the older legend and differs from that in all the recent manuscripts gives some color to the claim that it was copied from a manuscript 500 years old. Make no mention of Edwin, but assign the revival of Masonry in the 10th century to King Athelstan. The more recent manuscripts, of which the Dowland is the earliest, introduce Prince Edwin into the legend and ascribe to him the honor of having obtained from Athelstan a charter and of having held an assembly at York. There are, then, two forms of the legend which, for the sake of distinction, may be designated as the older and the later. The older legend makes Athelstan the reviver of Masonry in England, and says nothing at all of Edwin. The later takes this honor from Athelstan and gives it to Prince Edwin, who is called his son. The part about Edwin is, then, an addition to the older legend, and was interpolated into it by the later legendists, as will be evidently seen if the following extract from the Dowland manuscript be read, and all the words there printed in italics be omitted. So read, the passage will conform very substantially with the corresponding one in the Roberts manuscript, which was undoubtedly a copy from some older manuscript, which contained the legend in its primitive form, wherein there is no mention of Prince Edwin. Here is the extract to be amended by the omission of words in italics. The good rule of Masonry was destroyed unto the time of King Ethelstan's days, that was a worthy king of England, and brought this land into good rest and peace, and built many great works of abbeys and towers, and other many diverse buildings, and loved well masons. And he had a son that hight Edwin, and he loved masons much more than his father did, and he was a great practiser in geometry, and he drew him much to talk and to commune with masons, and to learn of them science, and afterward for love that he had to masons and to the science he was made a mason, and he gat footnote. This word is used in the sense of given or granted in an undoubted historical document, Ethelstan's charter to the town of Beverley. Yet I, the king Edelston, has gotten and given to St. John of Beverley, etc. He gave of the king his father a charter and commission to hold every year once an assembly, where that ever they would within the realm of England, and to correct within themselves defaults and trespasses that were done within the science. And he held himself an assembly at York, and there he made masons, and gave them charges, and taught them the manners, and commanded that rule to be kept ever after, and took then the charter and commission to keep, and made ordinance that it should be renewed from king to king. The elimination of only 13 words relieves us at once of all difficulty, and brings the legend into precise accord with the tradition of the older manuscripts. Thus eliminated, it asserts 1. That King Athelstan was a great patron of the arts of civilization. He brought the land into rest and peace. This statement is sustained by the facts of history. 2. He paid especial attention to architecture and the art of building, and adorned his country with abbeys, towns, towers is a clerical error, and many other edifices. History confirms this also. 3. He was more interested in, and gave a greater patronage to, architecture than his father and predecessor, Edward, another historical fact. 4. He gave to the masons or architects a charter as a guild, and called an assembly of the craft at York. This last statement is altogether traditional. Historians are silent on the subject, just as they are on the organization of a Grand Lodge in 1717. The mere silence of historians as to the formation of a guild of craftsmen or a private society is no proof that such a guild or society was not formed. The truth of the statement that King Athelstan caused an assembly of masons to be held in the year 926 at the city of York depends solely on a tradition which has, however, until recently, been accepted by the whole Masonic world as an undoubted truth.